Welcome back. Now, top U.S. trade delegates are in New Delhi for another round of talks with Indian officials, but there is still no clarity on whether both sides can see a framework deal on tariffs by the year end. India's chief economic advisor has said that he would be surprised if there is no deal by March next year, telling Bloomberg that most bilateral trade issues have been ironed out. A U.S. delegation top trade envoy told the U.S. Senate that there is some resistance from India on row crops. The White House, meanwhile, is pushing hard for more agricultural access, a demand that could complicate the final phase of talks. To take us through this discussion forward, well, I'm now joined by Jayant Dasgupta, India's former ambassador to WTO. Mr. Dasgupta, thank you once again for joining us, being a part of this conversation. First question, the CEA, Anantha Nageswaran, expressing optimism that March 2026 is by when we'll have a bilateral trade agreement. Do you share that optimism?
I am sure that there would be some kind of a deal, whether that would be by January 2026 or it will move on to March. I don't really know. But one of the things which will have a very definite bearing on this would be the US Supreme Court's verdict on the Trump tariffs. Because the Supreme Court finished its hearing on the 5th of November 2025, and it has reserved its ruling. And it will be a full bench, 6 plus 3, 9 judges. So, and the issue at which has to be decided is whether President Trump has the powers to fix tariffs for differential tariffs for different countries under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. If that were to be ruled as ultra vires, the president's powers, then all the tariffs which have been imposed, barring steel, aluminum, and autos, which have been imposed under a different provision of the US Trade Expansion Act, all of them will have to be rolled back. That is one. In which case, the scenario will change completely, and India's bargaining position would get much improved. So I think there is this overhang, huge overhang, which is delaying perhaps the final agreement on this trade issue.
Right, so a major overhang as far as these negotiations are concerned. But speaking of talks, we've missed multiple headlines. We've missed the fall deadline. We've missed the year-end deadline. Now March 2026 is what we're aiming for. Is it only an issue of certain negotiables that we're working on, whether that's agri, whether that's dairy, or is it more a case of perhaps political will and political capital, especially on part of the U.S. administration, the Trump administration?
Well, if the tariffs are declared to be ultra vires, the powers of the president, then the US's bound tariffs, which they have committed in the WTO, will be between 3.5% to about 3.9%. And that will change.
So that was Mr. Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador of India to the WTO. We've lost the connection with him, but he was giving clarity on one major issue that could completely change the dynamics of the conversations, the way they're currently structured between the two countries. Bear in mind, there is a decision awaited from the US Supreme Court on what the legitimacy is of the Trump tariffs, and that is going to be a major decisive factor as far as these negotiations are concerned on finalizing these conversations. Mr. Dasgupta, we were again speaking of the overhang. You were talking about assuming that these Trump tariffs are here to stay. In that situation, is it more a case, finalizing the deal between India and US, is it more a case of a sanction of the blessings being granted by Donald Trump himself, by POTUS?
Well, in which case, if the US Supreme Court were to uphold President Trump's actions, then I think his hands will be strengthened. And he will, of course, very recently, he has been heard saying that he wants to impose more tariffs on Indian rice. Indian rice are already under 53% tariffs. So that will only strengthen his hands and his bargaining position. And mind you, in terms of India, we have suffered a lot in relation to the labor-intensive industries, especially apparel, textiles, leather, gems and jewelry, shrimp.
Sure.
These are the areas where we have had to lay off, I think, tens of thousands of workers. So we have a very large concern, and we can't allow this to drift, because what happens is, in these areas, which are low technology, labor intensive areas, if the supply chain gets broken, and let's say it continues for 6 months, then the US buyers will find alternate suppliers, and then they will stick to them, even if the US were to remove the tariffs against India. So that is what we have to.
Right, Mr. Dasgupta. Right, Mr. Dasgupta. So again, clearly mounting urgency here, as India, US have missed multiple deadlines for finalizing this. Now, March 2026 is when the CEA says there's likely to be some form of agreement, some framework between the two countries. That, unfortunately, is all the time that we have. Mr. Dasgupta, thank you once again for joining us, for sharing perspective on this developing story. But with that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. More news and updates will continue right here.
26 years of CNBC-TV18